We've talked about modern beat 'em ups, we've talked about retro beat 'em ups. Now let's just talk about all of the beat 'em ups. Top 30 beat 'em ups of all time. I want to talk about the Battletoads Arcade game. This one you can play in 3-player co-op, and it's just a straight up beat 'em up. Unlike the other Battletoads games that include a variety of different gameplay, including platforming, racing, swinging on those ropes, I guess. This one just is a straightforward beat 'em up, and I feel like that was the best thing that the original Battletoads games did. So it's kind of just refreshing to see them just focus on the best parts of Battletoads. And because they did that, I feel like this is the best Battletoads game to ever be released, in my personal opinion. The combat's simple, but it's really polished and solid. And just the ability to play this in 3 players, I think takes it up a notch as well. I would have loved to see this get a home release back in the day. That being said, it did get a release on Rare Replay, but that was years later. Knights of the Round is an arcade beat 'em up that was later ported to the Super Nintendo. This is a brawler that incorporates weapons and magic, similar to Golden Axe. There's also some RPG elements, and you could play this one with up to 3 players. Another cool addition is at certain points of the game, you can ride on a horse, and you can attack the enemies from horseback, and the horse is able to stomp on them as well. Knights of the Round is an excellent Capcom beat 'em up that's definitely worth trying out. Cadillacs and Dinosaurs is another arcade beat 'em up that came out in 1993 by Capcom, and this one's pretty well known, but that's for good reason. I think it's one of the best Capcom beat 'em ups ever, and this is another one that you can play with up to 3 players. Each character has 2 special moves, including a desperation move that will lower your health a little bit every time you use it. There was a Cadillacs and Dinosaur game that came out on Sega CD back in the day, but it's a totally different game, and that game absolutely sucks. It's kind of an on-rails shooter and has terrible graphics. I hate that game. Don't even play that game. Remove it from your mind altogether. Another one by Capcom is The Punisher. This is a 2-player co-op beat 'em up where you play as the Punisher and Nick Fury. This one came out in 1993. The game was also ported to the Sega Genesis. To me, the standout feature here is the ability to use guns. Unfortunately, you can't use them all the time. There's just certain sections in the game, but it helps break things up and adds some variety. You're also able to drop bombs and pick up various weapons. This is just another classic from Capcom. When people think about the best Golden Axe games, I think a lot of people go towards Revenge of Death Adder, but my personal favorite is the original Golden Axe. I played this for countless hours on the Sega Genesis back in the day, and I think that they just really nailed everything here. The music's great, the combat is really solid, and of course you have the magic abilities. This is one where once you get into the rhythm of things with your partner, you can really just breeze through this game. I think that Golden Axe is really one of the most important games in the beat 'em up genre, and it definitely had an impact on future hack and slash beat 'em ups. One of the games that is most likely inspired by Golden Axe is Dragon's Crown. This is a 4-player beat 'em up that originally came out on the PS3. This one has a variety of characters and classes that you can choose from, each with their own unique abilities, and you're able to level up and improve your stats and magic. Overall, I really do enjoy this game, but I do think that it's a little bit long for a beat 'em up. Castle Crashers. This is the one that really got me back into gaming, really caught my attention. And I kind of realized I didn't really lose interest in gaming, I just wasn't that interested in the new games that were coming out. So once I started playing Castle Crashers, I got really excited about gaming once again. Castle Crashers is a great beat 'em up, but what really made it interesting was the 4-player co-op gameplay. Playing this with my brother and my friends back in the day really makes this one of my all-time favorite games. Ninja Baseball Batman is another one that came out in 1993. This one was made by IREM. You have 4 playable characters, and it's just really fun and colorful, just kind of lighthearted. The objective of the game is to recover stolen artifacts from the Baseball Hall of Fame. Could this be considered a sports game? Not really, but if it was, this would probably be my favorite sports game. Definitely the only baseball related game that I will ever want to play. This is another one that's just really fun and chaotic, especially when you get up to 4 players. I never saw this one in arcades. I really hope I get a chance to try this on real hardware at some point. Final Fight 3 came out exclusively for the Super Nintendo. and it's, in my opinion, the best in the series. This one really steps up the combat. You have a lot of moves that you can pull off, and you use Street Fighter button combinations. But they also added branching paths to change things up a bit. This is one of my favorite co-op games on the Super Nintendo. Battle Circuit is a late Capcom release that came out in 1997. It's Capcom's final release as a beat-em-up in arcades. You can play the whole game in 4-player co-op, and there are 5 playable characters, each with unique combos and fighting styles. Between levels, you're able to purchase upgrades using the discs that you pick up. You can learn new combos and attacks. I think this is one of Capcom's best beat-em-up. It doesn't quite get the respect that it deserves compared to some of Capcom's other releases. Sengoku 3 is another game that really changed up the formula of its predecessors. This one came out on the Neo Geo. There's just a lot of variety in moves here. And similar to Final Fight 3, it has some unique button combinations. So pulling off these combos almost feels like a fighting game. This has some of the best 2D art I've ever seen. Very impressive for the Neo Geo. And this is one of my favorite co-op games on the Neo Geo for sure. Final Vendetta. Now, this game originally came out on Steam as well as other home consoles, and it's clearly an homage to games like Final Fight and Streets of Rage, but it has that nice polish, games that you would expect to see on the Neo Geo. When a lot of new beat-em-ups are trying to reinvent the wheel and add a bunch of RPG elements and roguelite elements and just pack the game full of different genres, this was a breath of fresh air. It's just a standard beat-em-up. It's just about the combat and solid controls. I love the use of color here. There's a lot of detail in the environments and the characters. This is just an excellent, super polished beat 'em up that's worth trying out. Oriental Legend 2. This is another late release arcade beat 'em up. This one came out in 2007. This is another one set in ancient China, but it follows the story of Journey to the West. Being a fan of Dragon Ball, I have always been interested in the Journey to the West story. So whenever there's a game based off of that, it definitely piques my interest. And there are 8 playable characters, including the Monkey King, the Pig character, and 6 others. This game came out in 2008, but this has some really beautiful hand-drawn animation. The backgrounds are beautiful with so much detail, and all the characters just have a lot of detail and color. There's also just a lot of variety in the move sets here. It's a shame that this game didn't get very much attention, and that's probably just because it's a really late arcade beat 'em up. Beat 'em ups were definitely dead by the time this came out. But truly, this is another one of the all-time great beat 'em ups that nobody really talks about, and it's definitely a step up from the original Oriental Legend. Guardian Heroes is another beat 'em up that incorporates RPG elements. This one came out exclusively for the Sega Saturn. The other thing that makes this game stand out is the multiple planes. So instead of just going left to right, you are jumping up and into the middle and down. So this definitely changes up the gameplay and makes you use different strategies for your combat. You can also level up and perform different spells using your magic. I also just love the art style for this game. It holds up great. Now let's talk about River City Underground. This is a continuation of River City Ransom, and a lot of people really don't talk about it. That's probably because it only came out on the PC. There hasn't been any home console releases yet. This takes everything great about River City Ransom. It has all of the same exploration, but adds a lot of variety in moves. And you can play this one with up to 4 players co-op. I love the art style here. It feels familiar. It's definitely influenced by the 8-bit original game, but made to look more modern. There's just so much variety in this game. You can play it for hours. I think my first playthrough, it took me 20 hours to beat, so that might be long for a beat 'em up, but I never felt bored here. Paprium. Despite all the controversy around the release of this game, let's put that aside and just focus on the game itself. It's just a really great, polished game. One of my favorite modern beat 'em ups. I specifically want to just talk about the visuals for a second. I love the color palette here. It has this really nice pastel look. There's so much attention to detail when it comes to the environment and the enemies. Also, the gameplay is just really solid. The combat feels good. You're able to dash, which I think is an underrated feature in a beat 'em up game. And you have your special attack. When you push A, you go into like a turbo mode. You're able to inflict a little bit more damage towards the enemies. This game also has branching paths, so Every time you play it, you can have a different experience. It's definitely worth trying multiple times. You still can't emulate this game, and it hasn't been ported to any modern platforms. So that's pretty unfortunate. I was lucky enough to pre-order this game back in the day and had to wait multiple years before I actually got it. But hopefully someday we get this game ported to Steam and all of the modern platforms, so everyone can at least experience this game. I can't say enough about Paprium. It's just a really excellent co-op beat 'em up. It's truly the best homebrew on the Genesis. The Gladiator, it came out in 2003, and I think that's the main reason why it went under a number of people's radar. I didn't even know this game existed until this year, and it's a shame because it's a great game. Has a beautiful art style, great combat, a solid character selection, and just a lot of depth to the gameplay, including branching paths. The game has a Chinese setting, which kind of sets it apart from the standard street fighting type of beat 'em up. And you can also use magic in this one. If you haven't played the Gladiator, now's the perfect time to check it out. This one's definitely a hidden gem. Another Capcom one is Dungeons & Dragons Shadow over Mystara. This is another hack and slash beat 'em up that incorporates magic, and this one can be played with up to 4 players. Much like a lot of the beat 'em ups with RPG elements, this one has different character classes that you can choose, each with their own unique abilities. There's also branching paths, so you can play the game multiple times and have a different experience. I love the massive boss fights here, but one of the standout features is for sure the magic. There's some really cool animations here, and you're able to just pull off some massive screen clearing attacks. This game was also ported to the Sega Saturn, but exclusively in Japan. Double Dragon Gaiden is a modern take on the Double Dragon formula, but this one definitely changes things up a bit. I love the art style here. It went with a more cartoony art style, but it has really great pixel art. But this one, they really changed things up a bit. Now it has some roguelite elements. So every time you play through the game, you have the opportunity to have a different experience. But the standout feature for me is the tag team gameplay. At the start of the game, each player picks 2 characters. And similar to Marvel vs. Capcom, you're able to switch between them on the fly. I think more beat 'em ups should incorporate this. It definitely made things more fresh. I really like the addition of Marion here, as she changes up the gameplay as well. She specializes in long range attacks, so that adds some variety. We can't talk about the all-time best beat 'em ups without including some Ninja Turtles games. When you're thinking about classic Turtle games, I think Turtles in Time is usually the go-to, and that's because it's an excellent game. You're able to play as the 4 main turtles. There's not a lot of variety in moves between characters. They still manage to make the game just feel fun and never boring. And if you play the original arcade version, you can play it in 4-player co-op. But there's also an excellent port that came out on the Super Nintendo. I think what makes this game most interesting is that there's so much variety in levels. Every stage that you play is completely different, and it never wears out its welcome. This is a pretty quick game that you can pick up and play, and get through in one sitting. There are so many Double Dragon games and ports of the original Double Dragon, but when thinking about the very best representation of Double Dragon, I had to go with Double Dragon Advance. This one came out on the Game Boy Advance, and it's basically a full remake of the original Double Dragon. It has a lot of the same levels, but they added new levels as well as new moves, a really great new art style, and lots of new weapons you can pick up. Since 2003, this game was just stuck to the Game Boy Advance, so I feel like a lot of people didn't get a chance to try this out. And of course, playing it with 2 players required 2 consoles, as well as 2 copies of the game and a link cable. But recently, the game has been ported to modern platforms, and it has local co-op. So if you missed this one on Game Boy Advance, there's no excuse not to try it now. Now another modern beat 'em up that doesn't get nearly the respect it deserves is Fight and Rage. This is a 3-player co-op brawler. The action here is incredibly chaotic and fast-paced. You have so much variety in your movesets here, and each character has their own strengths and weaknesses. This is another one with branching paths, so it's worth trying this one out multiple times. I love the pixel art style here, it's very unique. If you haven't played Fight and Rage, do yourself a favor and grab a couple friends and get to it right away. I was a big fan of the original River City Girls, but I feel like River City Girls 2 really took things up a notch. It's now a 4-player co-op game. You have some new moves, there's new characters, and the levels and bosses are really fun and interesting to play with. And with DLC, they even added the Lee brothers. So this ends up being kind of like a Double Dragon game. This is an outstanding beat 'em up that has turned out to be one of my favorites. One of the genres that indie developers have really mastered is the beat 'em up. We've seen some of the best beat 'em ups of all time come out in recent years, and Mother Russia Bleeds is definitely one of those titles. It's just over-the-top action and violence. You can play it with up to 4 players. The story here is very dark, with a lot of mature themes, so maybe don't play this one with your kids. But I just love the combat here. Every hit feels impactful. It's just satisfying to pick up some weapons and knock these guys across the screen. And I really like the pixel art style here. I think people are finally catching on to this game, but for a while I felt like nobody really was talking about it. If you haven't played Mother Russia Bleeds, definitely do so right now, because it's really one of the best beat 'em ups ever made. Now we gotta talk about the original River City Ransom. From the outside, this one might feel a bit dated, but when you dig into it, this game was surprisingly ahead of its time. Not only is it a beat 'em up, it incorporated some RPG elements. As you fight through the enemies, you gather money, and you're able to learn new moves and upgrade your abilities. There's also a lot of exploration, so it's not just going from point A to point B. You're gonna go all around the map. And it's not exactly linear. You can accomplish your goals in whatever order you want, for the most part. This has always been one of my go-tos for a quick pick up and play. I think it's the best co-op game on the NES. Alien vs. Predator. This is a very well-known Capcom beat 'em up. It's just really surprising that this never got a home release. It's always in the list of the best beat 'em ups of all time, and that's for good reason. It's just a really solid game. You're able to play as humans as well as predators, and you work together just taking on all of the aliens. I love the combination between close combat and long distance weapons. The character designs here are great, and this is another one that could be played in 3 players. There's also a 2-player arcade cabinet as well. I don't know, being able to use guns in a beat 'em up has always been an interesting thing for me. It definitely adds some variety. And you will see a lot of weapons and guns that you're able to pick up and use throughout your playthrough. I can't say enough about Alien vs. Predator. Yeah, it's just one of the best beat 'em ups of all time. Guardians, Denjin Ma 2. It's a huge step up from its original, specifically with the polish and just the amount of moves you're able to pull off. The first one only had 2 buttons that you could use for gameplay. This one uses 3, with 1 dedicated to a powerful attack, and that's often used as a projectile. And if you push the special button in conjunction with jump or attack, you perform desperation moves. There's also a number of weapons. You can pick up swords, bars, and bombs. This one's only 2 players. It has really nice colorful graphics and 8 playable characters. Again, this is one that was just never ported to any console. And it's a shame, because actually, this is one of the best beat 'em ups of all time. Another one that I just didn't even know existed until recently. So if you haven't played Guardians, now's the best time to get onto MAME and do it. Or find it in an arcade if you're able to do that, which you probably won't. So yeah, use emulation. Steal this game. Now we have to talk about TMNT Shredder's Revenge. This is the reboot to the TMNT franchise that we all wanted. They just did everything right here. It has great pixel art, excellent music, you have a great variety in moves here, and each character actually has some unique attacks. But the standout feature to me was the ability to play this in 6-player co-op. And not only are you stuck playing the Turtles, you can actually play as Casey Jones, Splinter, April O'Neil, and through DLC, you can play as Miyamoto Usagi. I honestly don't know what I would have changed about this. I think this is the perfect evolution of the Ninja Turtles franchise. It really is one of the best beat 'em ups of all time. I can't say enough about this game. And we gotta talk about Streets of Rage 4. This one might be the best in the series. It pretty much took everything from the original series and improved upon it in a lot of ways. No longer do you have to deal with enemies going off screen. No longer do you have to deal with accidentally picking up health when you're trying to fight an enemy. They assigned a button separate for that. And you're able to turn off friendly fire. They even included 4-player co-op here. And it might be the best beat 'em up of all time. But the only reason why I'm not putting it at number 1 is because I think Streets of Rage 2 just can't be beat. Maybe technically it's not the best beat 'em up ever, but it's the game that really elevated the genre and just became the gold standard for all beat 'em ups. So yeah, number 1, I still have to give it to Streets of Rage 2. Not only is it my favorite Sega Genesis game from my childhood, it's just my favorite beat 'em up of all time. It has amazing music, and the combat is excellent with tight controls and solid move sets. There's a nice variety in characters, which each have their own strengths and unique attacks. Everybody knows this game, it's kind of the obvious choice, but that's for good reason. It truly is just the best beat 'em up of all time. So there are 30 of the all-time best beat 'em ups. I know there's a ton of other games that I could have included, so let me know what your favorite is. And if you enjoyed this video, make sure to watch our video about the top 20 retro beat 'em ups. And thank you for watching.